Recently, I've been playing far too much Prince of Persia. Not that one, the video game. And it inspired me to make a piece based off some of the Persian mythology. So I dove straight in with Anahita. This is a pretty cool goddess, and I felt was quite fitting with the kind of work that I do. So I create this design, run it through the same filter galleries because I'm lazy and I don't want to make my own stencils. And as always, I fight with the printer. I mean, look at this. You see straight away, I'm pissed off by the fucking printer. Now, actually, in this case, I'm the problem. I printed it off backwards, but my frustration, I throw it in the corner and then immediately have to retrieve it because I'm just making a mess. So straight into round two, and this time I've managed to print it the right way round. But I'm about to discover that even though I did it right, the printer's still out to get me. So I always align the top stencil underneath the bottom piece of stencil. That way when I'm pulling my stencil away from top to bottom, the top piece lifts the bottom piece because it's already kind of tucked underneath. Now, this is a unique problem I'm having in this particular case, where I'm printing off the stencils, but they don't line up, even though they're both printed the same size. What I realize is the height was set to 33 centimeters, but it's add 1 millimeter just at the very end because there's something to do with the height and width not aligning perfectly, so one of those numbers had to give, and I assume the computer just rounded up one of the tiny fractions of a millimeter so that it would sit correctly. So I print them off again, but this time at 33.01 instead of my 33, so that both pieces align properly when the computer rounds up that second print. Not that it really matters because the print is chewing up my prints anyway. Now, I think that the problem here is that I'm using a cheap eco tank instead of a more expensive one. But the problem was I didn't want to spend money on a printer that I wasn't sure I liked yet, or at least a stencil method that I wasn't sure I liked yet. So here's a fun little Easter egg for anybody who watched my last video where I didn't learn to put a piece of tape on the back of my hand when I'm sticking these stencils together. And fortunately, Molly's there, so she taped it down for me. This week's stenciling tip is to cut little slits into the edge of the stencils so that when you put a flat piece of paper on a curved surface, it folds with the curved surface. Trust me, helps massively. Now, I'm going to use my usual mix of the two types of electrum, the gold standard and the green gold, but I don't know if you saw how fucking much of that gold standard that I put on there. I know in hindsight I've ruined it before I've even started. Apply the stencil, stick that bastard on, peel it off, and oh god, what a mess. Clean it off, start again, round two. Now you'll notice this time I've printed the stencil in landscape instead of portrait. It's because I lined it up on his, hey look at that, tape on my hand. I've learned. I lined it up on his body and found that it was too small. I also know that I've got to be working on his lower leg in the future, so when I come up to that, I don't want to have an awkward space where I can't fill it, so I'm prepping for that. And this time I'm using way less electrum for this stencil because the last one was ruined by me flooding the area with just too much primer. Now, I had started by using the spray that they give you with the Eco Tank fluid, but I really hated the way it just wasn't sticking to the skin. The paper was flaking away and moving around in a way that I couldn't control. So parts of my stencil, and my stencils are complicated, started doubling up, which meant that when I peeled it off, I couldn't see what I was doing. And the big problem that I'm having with this particular stenciling method is that I'm not spreading my primer to a large enough area. So at the bottom there, I had completely lost the stencil. And considering that day one is the bottom part is the area that I focus on, losing that stencil is a bloody nightmare. What a cool little flip I did there with the phone, just so you know that I'm doing this amateurishly. I'm happy with how that stencil's holding, how that's looking, and I think that that's a good starting point. Now, to answer one of the most common questions, I am using a 3-round liner, a 5-round shader, a 9-round shader, a 15-round shader, a 13 soft edge mag, and a 27 soft edge mag. This is my staple for all of the work that I do. Now, if you want to know more about the machines that I'm using, the colors that I've picked, the needles that I use, and how fast and why I run my machine the way I do head over to my Patreon. And there it is. There's the first plug that I put into any of my videos. Of course I'm trying to sell you shit. I want your money. You want my information. Let's make a deal. Let's make a trade. It's, it's so pathetic. Now, I've started this around the knee, which seems like a really horrible, brutal thing to do. But the way I'm trying to do this section by section and building from the top up is so that I'm not going over areas again and again. And starting at the knee means while he's still full of energy, I'm not going to... Where did the camera go? I'm not going to ruin his life. Anyway, on to the second day. And if you don't appreciate that Zelda reference, you've got to just... you got to leave. You've got to stop watching my videos. I was lucky today that I got to use my apprentice to set up my station for me and get all my colours out. That's the worst part of this job for me. This poor bastard has to go through my obscure methods for picking colours. Now, I sped this up because it's fucking boring to watch. Again, head over to my Patreon where I've got a full video on all of the colours that I'm actually using. And you know how earlier I said I wasn't trying to ruin this guy's life? Well, did you see me ripping that tape off his poor leg? I'm not sure whether I was lying or not. People are always really terrified about the second day and it being more painful because they've already sat through a day of tattooing. But you'll notice that I don't really go over any of the stuff that we did yesterday. I go up to it and next to it, but that whole section is finished. It's complete. So I mark out the hair, mark out the earring, and bring that all nice and close without going over any of the other stuff. Now, I'm not going to lecture you at length about my process and how I approach a tattoo like this, much like I did in my last video. This tattoo was a personal project, and it was more for me exploring this Persian goddess than it was about the actual tattoo application. You guys are just along for the ride here. Yo, why did I say it like that? Anyway, this was a particularly interesting project to me because my father is from a Muslim country and my mother is from England. This has left me with quite an interest in pagan mythology, especially from those regions that my families are from. That, coupled with my absolute obsession with video games and playing through the most recent Prince of Persia and enjoying the older ones, even the 89 one was, I'm not going to say it was good, but it was fun. And it left me researching the gods, goddesses, and mythology that the game was drawing from. I started reading about Anahita. She was the goddess of water, fertility, prosperity, and war. And seeing fertility and war, I was like, holy shit, this is fucking cool. And then I find that her name means moist, strong, and pure, which is not so good. But again, finding that her holy animals are the dove and the peacock, tying that into what I had just played with the great Simorg, this all-powerful bird, it just seemed like a series of things that I thought would be so fun for me to design. And recently I've been struggling with being an artist and being a commercial artist, and this combination of how I make stuff that I think is cool and what I actually want to put out into the world versus what I'm commissioned to do. So creating a Middle Eastern warrior fertility goddess with elements that I've drawn from a video game seemed like the perfect starting point for me. Now, that being said, if you do want to hear all my bullshit about how I made this tattoo, again, head over to the Patreon. I should have a video up shortly. It should be more explore. Fucking cool. Look at that. That's sick. I'm proud of this piece. Now, the goal with this one was to create something that I could hang up as wall art as well as have the original, a piece that somebody can actually wear in their real everyday life. I hope you like this piece as much as I do, and hopefully you head over and subscribe to the channel, sign up to my Patreon. There's a cat on my desk and she's ruining everything and it's really annoying me. Thanks for watching. Sam and Charles, I'm signing off. Get off the desk.